911, where is your emergency? Okay, tell me exactly what happened.
They're dead. They're a gunshot wound to the head. They're dead. They've been dead since this morning.
Those anguished screams came from a daughter who had just walked into her parents' home on Father's Day morning to deliver enchiladas, only to discover a scene so horrific that even veteran investigators would later call it the worst they had ever witnessed.
It is the most important case in the state police books right now.
In the small community of El Rancho, New Mexico, 3 members of the beloved Ortiz family were brutally murdered with a pickaxe.
And I walked in and I was like, Mom, and then I walked over to her to shake her and her head was blown. And so I ran to the kitchen to check for my brother and my dad, and I thought it was my dad laying on the floor in his underwear because his face was so blown off.
The level of rage required to commit such an act left an entire town paralyzed with fear. And the person responsible? Someone the family had trusted. Someone they had fed, sheltered, and tried to help. This video is dedicated to Lloyd, Dixie, and Steven Ortiz to ensure their lives are remembered and their story told in a way that honors them forever. Before we dive into the horror that unfolded on Coral Street, let's talk about who the Ortiz family really was. Because this wasn't just a headline. This was a family that gathered at church on Sundays, worked harder than anyone else in town, and greeted every neighbor with a smile.
Oh, they were amazing. Amazing.
No, go ahead, I don't mean to cut you off.
We had a big family camping trip planned for July 4th. Well, leading up to July 4th. We had like a 9-day camping trip planned. And we were so excited about it.
For starters, El Rancho, New Mexico, is not the kind of place where you'd expect something like this to happen. With a population of just 1,500 people, it's the type of close-knit community where neighbors know each other by name, where families gather for potlucks, and where trust is simply a given. And in 2011, one of the most respected families in El Rancho was the Ortiz family. Lloyd Ortiz was 55 years old, a tile contractor who was up before the sun rose every single day and didn't stop working until well after 9 at night. His work ethic was legendary. People in town said if you needed a job done right, you called Lloyd. He was dependable, honest, and deeply committed to providing for his family. His wife, Dixie, was 53 years old. She worked in a nursing home, and her co-workers said she genuinely loved helping people.
Lloyd Ortiz owned his own tile company, and his wife Dixie was an activities director here at this Los Alamos nursing home. Her coworkers say she had such a big heart and was a fierce advocate for the elderly.
And she brought that joy every day, every day. She will be so sadly missed.
Now, Lloyd and Dixie had been married for 34 years. By all accounts, they were pillars of their community, the kind of people everyone looked up to. They had 2 daughters, Sherry and Angela. Sherry was married to a man named Jesse, and together they had 2 children. The family lived in a unique arrangement. 2/3 of the home on Coral Street was occupied by Lloyd, Dixie, and their son Steven, while Sherry, Jesse, and their children lived in the other section, separated by a fence. For a family that had always been so close, this setup allowed them to stay connected while maintaining their own space. But perhaps the most inspiring part of the Ortiz family's story was Steven. In 1989, when Angela and Sherry were teenagers, Lloyd and Dixie met a 7-month-old boy named Steven. He had cerebral palsy, and his left side was paralyzed. Doctors told the family it would be a tough road ahead. He may never walk, may never talk, and would likely need assistance with most things in life. But Lloyd and Dixie didn't hesitate. They fell in love with him instantly and adopted him into their family. And Steven? He defied every single prediction. Through immense physical and mental work, through endless love and encouragement from his parents and sisters, Steven overcame everything doctors said he never would. He learned to walk. He learned to talk. He reached developmental milestones that seemed impossible at first. His sisters said their family felt perfect and complete with Steven in it. By 2011, Steven was 21 years old. He had undergone 2 brain surgeries to manage his condition, and his parents had obtained a medical marijuana card to help ease his constant and debilitating headaches. They even had a license to grow it for him on their property. Steven became a local celebrity at their church. His pastor recalled that whenever Steven walked in, he would greet every single person there. He was a joy to be around, the pastor said. Everyone adored him. Up to this point, the life of the Ortiz family was stable, and then, in the early hours of June 19, 2011, everything changed.
Police are now releasing the names of the 3 people found dead in the small New Mexico village of El Rancho.
A relative found the 3 people shot to death late last night in the family home. News 13's David Romero is live from State Police headquarters in Santa Fe with the very latest. David.
Deanna, State Police say they're still trying to piece together if this was a homicide or a murder-suicide. Now, the 3 victims are 55-year-old Lloyd Ortiz, his wife, 53-year-old Dixie Ortiz, and their son, 21-year-old Steven Ortiz. All 3 were found dead in the home behind the one you see on the screen right now. This is off of Coral Street in El Rancho, which is 5 miles west of Pojoaque. State Police have been on the scene since the 911 call came in last night around 7 p.m. At this point, State Police can only say that the victims died of gunshot wounds, but can't confirm if there was forced entry into the home or how many times the victims were shot.
To understand what really happened before that discovery, let's take a step back. June 18, 2011 was a Saturday night. Sherry and her husband, Jesse, decided to spend some time at a local casino before heading home. It was a relaxing evening, nothing out of the ordinary. They came home, settled in, and started watching a film together. But sometime in the early hours of the morning, around 3 a.m., they were jolted awake by a noise outside. Their dog started barking frantically. Jesse got up, grabbed his gun, and carefully looked outside through the window. What he saw was strange, but not immediately alarming. A gray car was pulling away from the property, and he could hear someone shouting, "Hurry up! Let's go!" Concerned, Jesse got into his truck and followed the car for a short distance before losing sight of it in the darkness. When he returned home, the family discussed what had happened. It was odd, certainly, but they ultimately decided it was probably just teenagers messing around, maybe trying to steal something, maybe just causing trouble. They went back to sleep, thinking nothing more of it. Several hours later, on Father's Day morning, Sherry woke up with a smile on her face. She had made enchiladas for her dad, his favorite. It was Father's Day after all, and she wanted to do something special for him. She walked over to the main part of the house, let herself in, and called out for her parents. But there was no response, and just then, she made a horrifying discovery.
Santa Fe 911, where is your emergency? Okay, tell me exactly what happened. I can't hear you when you're yelling. Try not to yell into the phone. I can't understand you.
They're dead. They're have gunshot wounds. They're dead. Dead. They've been dead since the morning.
When investigators arrived on the scene at around 7 p.m. that evening, they were met with a level of carnage that shook even the most experienced officers. One investigator would later say it was the worst crime scene he had ever been called to. Dixie was found in the master bedroom, still in her pajamas. She had sustained severe trauma to her head. Lloyd was discovered in the backyard. He had been struck 7 times, injuries to both his head and torso. And in the kitchen, officers found 21-year-old Steven. It was immediately clear that he had fought hard to defend himself, but he had been struck 17 times in total. He succumbed to his injuries there on the floor. Sherry would later recount the nightmare of that morning in an interview.
I started to run toward her, and that's when I saw a hole in her, close to her temple, and dried blood down her face.
The ferocity and level of rage displayed by the perpetrator shocked everyone. This wasn't just a killing. This was something driven by deep, uncontrollable anger. The brutality suggested this was personal. At first, authorities believed the victims had been shot. The wounds were so deep, so devastating, that gunshot wounds seemed like the only explanation. But as the investigation continued and autopsy results came in, the truth would prove even more disturbing. The Ortiz family had been killed with a pickaxe, a 5-pound tool swung with enough force to cause the catastrophic injuries found on all 3 victims. The realization sent chills through the investigative team. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was personal. This was rage.
Well, Jessica, all of the people I spoke with say they can't understand why this family would have been killed. That, coupled with the fact that a killer is still out there, has everyone concerned.
A triple homicide, obviously, rocks the community.
And this has rocked them to the point of silence. Neighbors here are so freaked out they didn't want to go on camera or even be identified for fear of what could happen to them. A lot of their fear stems from the fact that none of them can understand why this family would be murdered. By all accounts, the Ortizes were good neighbors and good people.
I can't speak on the specifics, who to look out for. As far as I know, we haven't identified any suspects yet.
Investigators immediately began looking for a motive. Lloyd's wallet was sitting on the kitchen counter, right next to Steven's body. But it was still full of money. So clearly, robbery didn't seem to be the primary motive. There was no DNA from an outsider inside the family home, which meant the killer had been extremely careful or was someone the family knew. At the back of the property, behind a locked fence, officers discovered several marijuana plants. Angela and Sherry quickly explained that their parents had a medical marijuana card for Steven, as well as a license to grow it for him. Authorities wondered if someone had found out about the plants and broken in to try to steal them. But then, investigators made another discovery. Lloyd and Dixie had a secret safe hidden at the back of their closet, a safe so well hidden that even their own children didn't know about it, and that presented an entirely new motive. What if someone knew about that safe? What if this wasn't about the plants at all? Investigators turned their attention to Jesse, Sherry's husband. This was the same man who followed a suspicious car the night before. However, his story had changed. First, he said he only went outside and stood there. Then he said he followed the car in his truck. Officers found this inconsistency odd. Why would someone forget such a significant detail? Jesse admitted that he and Lloyd had argued on occasion, but he insisted the disagreements were always over stupid and petty things, and were forgotten as soon as they happened. Still, authorities couldn't rule anything out. They searched Jesse and Sherry's part of the home. Nothing came back forensically, and the CCTV footage from the casino lined up with their timeline. Police were officially able to rule out Jesse and Sherry as having played any part in the deaths. Hoping the killer had simply discarded the pickaxe somewhere nearby, authorities searched the surrounding area extensively. And remarkably, they found it, just a short distance away in a field near the Ortiz family home. It was still covered in blood. Investigators sent the weapon off for testing, praying it would be an open and shut case. But the results were devastating. The only DNA that came back was from Lloyd, Dixie, and Steven. There was nothing else on it. No fingerprints, no trace evidence, nothing. The killer had been extraordinarily careful.
We're uncertain what we have, and until we get a break, we're not going to know.
Obviously, up to this point, every lead had been stretched. But then Angela remembered there was still one person who hadn't been interviewed. Someone they were close with, Nicholas Ortiz.
Do you know anything about this case that could help us?
I don't. The only thing I've heard is what people have to me from the news.
Lloyd just told you. What exactly did it say? You remember? Yeah.
Telling me that I effed up my trust with them, not to go near them anymore or anything. I said, okay, fine. So what you guys want to do? And that was really the last time we spoke.
Do you think if you found out who did that?
If I found out who did it, I would call the police right.
So who was Nicholas Ortiz? And how did a teenager once described as helpful and friendly become one of the most hated names in New Mexico? Nicholas Ortiz was 16 years old in 2011. He was not related to the Ortiz family. He just happened to share the same last name. But he was close with Sherry's son, and the two would hang out at school. Nicholas also went to the same church as the family. His pastor described him as helpful, always staying late to tidy up, and friendly with everyone. But Nicholas's home life was far from stable. After frequent bouts of difficulty, volatility, and fighting at his own home, Sherry had offered him a room in their part of the house, hoping it would help and give him some stability. Nicholas also spent time at Lloyd and Dixie's, and they treated him well, often driving him around whenever he needed a lift and cooking him dinner. For a while, things seemed fine. But then, things began to change. Sherry and Jesse noticed money going missing. Then, they walked in on Nicholas going through their belongings. Instead of asking him to leave, they saw it as a cry for help. They decided to give him money for the contributions he was making around the home, hoping this would stop the stealing. It didn't. Nicholas's attitude only got worse. His behavior was making Lloyd and Dixie more and more uncomfortable. After finding him hiding in the garden one day, having jumped over the fence uninvited, Lloyd finally told him to leave the family alone and go back to his parents' house. That confrontation happened just weeks before the murders. When asked about his relationship with the family, Nicholas was open about the tension. He admitted that Lloyd had asked him to leave and told him not to come near them anymore. He said that was the last time they really spoke. He also said he was at home the night of the murders. He woke up his dad to wish him a happy Father's Day just after midnight and saw his mom off to work at 7 a.m. His family corroborated this alibi. The police let him go, and the case went cold.
It's really hard when this holiday comes around because, it brings back that memory of when I got that phone call, and it's the last thing that anybody ever wants to hear.
As December of 2012 approached, the holiday season was nearly upon them. The murders of the Ortiz family had become one of the state's most chilling unsolved mysteries, and investigators were starting to fear that without any DNA leads, the case might never be solved.
The murderer is still a mystery, exactly 2 years after a family was killed at their El Rancho home. Action 7 News reporter Alana Grimstad has continuing coverage on whether police have any clue as to who killed 3 people in northern New Mexico.
It's been 2 years, but I still live with this every day. I miss them every second of my life.
It is the most important case in the state police books right now.
Still an active, ongoing, but unsolved homicide investigation.
A lot of times cases do not solve themselves within a day, and unfortunately this is a case that's requiring a lot more resources and some time.
I thought that this would be solved by now.
But as time goes by, family members of the victims are starting to lose faith in the police investigation. And they can't shake the fear that the killer is still out there.
I want whoever did this to be behind bars immediately. That's the only thing I hope. Every single day I hope that.
State police say they continue following many leads but won't comment on any specifics or say if they have any suspects in mind. Investigators say they are bringing in outside agencies to help but won't say who or how.
Meanwhile, the gray car Jesse had seen that 3 a.m. before had long since been sold and crushed at a scrapyard. The investigation was stalling. Evidence was disappearing. Hope was fading. And then, out of nowhere, one phone call changed everything. A woman currently serving time in prison contacted police. She said she had information about what had happened to Lloyd, Dixie, and Steven. And the reason there was no DNA evidence, she explained, was simple. The attacker had been wearing socks over his hands at the time of the assault. This caller was 24-year-old Ashley Roybal. She had a string of convictions, including burglary and drug-related charges. But what she told investigators was chilling. Ashley said that on the night of the murders, she had been smoking marijuana with her 15-year-old cousin Jose and his friend, Nicholas Ortiz. According to Ashley, Jose and Nicholas decided they needed money, so they hatched a plan to steal from the Ortiz family. Nicholas was somehow aware of the safe hidden in the family home, and claimed there was $20,000 inside. He also wanted to steal the marijuana plants. Ashley said she drove the two boys to a road near the Ortiz residence around 3 a.m. in a gray car, the same type of car Jesse had seen driving away that early morning. She then drove home. 45 minutes later, at 3:45 a.m., Ashley received a call from Jose. He said he had panicked at the last minute and couldn't go through with it. He could hear dogs barking, and some families were still awake. Although Nicholas tried to convince him, Jose refused. He watched as Nicholas walked up to the back door and knocked. Then Jose realized the gravity of the situation and ran to hide behind the house. After that, Nicholas called Ashley, telling her she needed to pick him up from outside the Ortiz house. When the two boys got in the car, it was obvious that something horrific had happened. Nicholas had blood on his trousers, a sock on his right hand, and a plastic bag tied around his right leg. He was in a panic, saying over and over, "I messed up. I killed them." Ashley said she drove him to her grandparents' house so he could take a shower. His bloody clothes were put in a bag and disposed of, and he was given new clothes to walk home in. The next day, Nicholas called Ashley again. He told her he had killed the family with a pickaxe before discarding it outside the house. Investigators had their breakthrough, but they still needed more. Phone records told the story. Records showed extensive communication between Ashley, Jose, and Nicholas on the night of June 18, 2011. Text messages and calls going back and forth that lined up with Ashley's timeline. Detectives called Nicholas in again. This time, when they asked him about the text messages, he quickly asked to stop the interview.
Well, with all due respect to you guys and all that, I'd really like to just stop talking and go home.
In the months that followed, investigators kept piecing together the case. 3 years after the murders, in 2014, officers finally focused on Jose to hear his side. He corroborated everything Ashley had revealed.
Ashley dropped me and Nick off so we could go around the house. She left. Nick told me he would go in. He wanted me to go in with him to go kill him. And I told him no. I knew he had did it. He told me he did it.
A third individual stepped forward, Eric Zubia, another friend of Nicholas. He revealed that Nicholas had once confessed to him that he had killed people, though he never said who. When Eric learned about the Ortiz family murders, he immediately put the pieces together and went to the police just 2 days later. That long-awaited day finally arrived, February 12, 2015.
Community was shocked and scared when the bodies of a couple and their son were found in their home, murdered with a pickaxe.
They were worried the case was going cold, but today police say they've made an arrest. And now there's questions about why a teen would want an entire family dead.
People I spoke with at a basketball game here at Pewaukee Valley High School tonight feel a mix of relief and shock that a member of their own community is now in custody.
Today, they announced they've arrested 20-year-old Nick Ortiz for the triple murder. News 13 has learned although he shares the same last name, he is not related to the family. State police have released few details as to how he knew them or a possible motive. For the small community, it's the news they've waited for nearly 4 years. But it was met with mixed emotion.
I went to school with him. I think people are more shocked than they are relieved.
Nicholas Ortiz was taken into custody, facing 5 separate charges. When the charges were read aloud, he simply said, "I don't agree with 2 of them." The detective later remarked that this was telling. The only 2 charges he disputed weren't related to murder. In their eyes, it was as close to a confession as they could hope for. Sherry, Jesse, and Angela were left reeling. The teenager they had welcomed into their home, fed, given money, and provided a place to sleep had betrayed them in a way they could never have imagined. In June 2015, Nicholas's trial began. The defense zeroed in on the family dynamics, questioning Sherry extensively about her relationship with her parents and brother. But she insisted there was no turmoil or bad blood within the family. Both Ashley and Jose were set to testify against Nicholas in exchange for plea deals. Ashley pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit aggravated burglary and tampering with evidence. She was given 20 years in prison, with 6 years suspended, meaning she would serve 14 years unless she got parole earlier. Jose was given full immunity and was never charged with any crimes. But then, in the middle of the proceedings, Jose changed his testimony. He now claimed that Ashley was the ringleader and that she had instructed both him and Nicholas to rob the home and kill the family. He said she gave them socks to cover their hands, plastic bags for their feet, and gave Nicholas the pickaxe. Nicholas didn't take the stand. The entire trial became a battle between Ashley's statement and Jose's contradicting version. After 3 days of deliberations, the jury was deadlocked. They hadn't reached a verdict on any counts. A mistrial was declared. Everyone thought the case was as strong as it could possibly be, but it meant a new trial would have to take place, forcing the family to go through it all again. The case went back to trial 17 months later. This time, there was a very different result. Nicholas Ortiz was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of aggravated burglary with a deadly weapon, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit aggravated burglary with a deadly weapon. Sherry started a petition begging the judge to give Nicholas 3 consecutive life sentences, 1 for each life he had taken. Prosecutors pushed for a sentence of nearly 75 years, but the judge didn't agree.
It was not the sentence prosecutors or the victim's family was hoping for, but Nicholas Ortiz will be going to prison for 25 years. And finally, this case is over. News 13's Rebecca Atkins has more on what the district attorney has to say about the sentence. Rebecca?
Well, Kim, the victim's family's surviving daughter wanted her family's killer to be sentenced as an adult with no possibility of parole, and prosecutors were asking he be put away for nearly 3/4 of a century, but a judge didn't seem to agree with that sentence.
So Nicholas Ortiz got 3 25-year sentences, 1 for each murder. The judge, instead of stacking them one on top of each other, he's running them all at the same time. He's running them concurrently.
Nicholas received credit for time served since his first arrest and was required to serve 85% of his sentence. He filed an appeal, but it was denied. It's possible he could be out of prison in his early 40s, eligible to apply for parole in late 2036 or early 2037. In the aftermath, the community came together to mourn. Memorial services were held. Flowers covered every surface. It was a testament to how deeply this family had touched lives. Sadly, brutal cases like the Ortiz family, where the crime was committed by someone the family trusted, are not isolated. In the next case, a similar situation unfolded, leading to one of the deadliest bloodbaths in Illinois.
It was yesterday.
Nobody needed to die like that. It's just not. It's just awful what all it's happened to this little town.
On a September night in 2009, a family of 6 settled in for what they thought would be a peaceful evening. The children were tucked into bed and good nights were exchanged. But for this family, the sunrise would never come. A man with sinister motives broke into their home, and what followed was nothing short of a brutal massacre. The bloodshed was so extreme, so horrific, that it would forever be known as the Bloodbath in Beason. Even the seasoned investigators were left shaken by the carnage they found. And soon, you'll understand why. This story brings us to Beason, a tiny town about 200 miles from Chicago, tucked away in the heart of Illinois. Beason has a population of just around 200 people, making it feel like a quiet, forgotten spot surrounded by farmland and rolling hills. And at the center of our story are 2 families, the G family and the Constant family, both of whom called Beason their home in the late 1990s. Now, let's get to know Rick G first. He was known for his strong work ethic and never-give-up attitude. Early in his career, he worked for his stepfather's construction company in Lincoln, Illinois, the nearest town with all the essentials: schools, Walmart, restaurants, and even a small airport. It was the go-to place for people from the smaller towns when they needed to get stuff done. Rick's stepdad, Pudge, and his mom, Judy, lived in Lincoln too. For years, Rick hustled hard, picking up construction gigs wherever he could, and saving every penny to build a better future for himself and his daughter, Nicole G. his dedication finally paid off when he bought property on the edge of Beason. And instead of sticking with his stepdad's company, he started his own business, which he called G Construction. He snagged a ranch-style home with a 2-car detached garage, an above-ground pool, and plenty of farmland for keeping chickens and other animals. But owning a business came with its costs, so Rick decided to rent out a room in his home. That's when Ruth Constant entered the scene, moving in with her 2 little kids, 3-year-old Justina and 1-year-old Dylan Constant. Initially, Ruth became Rick's tenant, but it didn't take long for sparks to fly between them. Ruth was a warm-hearted woman known for her outgoing personality and sense of humor, and Rick was the perfect match for her. As their bond grew stronger, Ruth discovered she was pregnant. In 1997, they tied the knot, with Rick at 34 and Ruth at 27. Not long after, they welcomed a baby boy, Austin, and their home was bustling with life. A year later, they celebrated the arrival of a baby girl, Jessica G., filling their hearts with more joy. Unfortunately, that joy was short-lived as they learned that little Jessica was born with a serious neurological condition, leaving her with disabilities that required around-the-clock care. With no facilities in Beason that could meet Jessica's needs, and unable to afford the necessary care, they reluctantly had to move her 50 miles away to Peoria, Illinois, where she became a temporary ward of the state. It was reported that she died well before the tragic murder occurred. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. Going back to the story, Dylan was also showing signs of trouble. According to their relatives, he was full of energy and often acted out, which is typical for kids his age. His teachers frequently sent home behavior reports, and Rick and Ruth worked hard to find ways to help him. Eventually, he was diagnosed with ADHD after they decided to seek therapy for him. While the therapy helped a little, it didn't make a significant difference. However, there was a glimmer of hope when Rick's daughter Nicole turned 18 and started dating Christopher Harris, a 21-year-old local. Their relationship grew serious quickly, and they married, moving just a minute away from Rick's house. Not long after, Nicole discovered she was pregnant, making Ruth and Rick grandparents for the first time with the arrival of little Elisa Harris. They were thrilled, and Nicole and Chris often dropped Elisa off with Ruth while they worked. And in late July 2009, Nicole and Chris welcomed their second baby. To everyone who knew them, they seemed like the perfect family. With a new baby expected to start crawling soon, Rick's stepdad, Pudge, and his grandson, Adam, decided to help Nicole by putting in new carpet in her home that September. The following day, 10-year-old Seton Landstrom ran over to the G's house to show off his new bike. But when he reached the porch, he froze at the sight of blood smeared all over the porch and the door slightly open. Worried, he dashed to Nicole's house where Rick's stepdad had spent the night. As soon as they heard the boy's discovery, they immediately went to the house, and Adam was the first to reach the porch and noticed the blood, as well as a knife at the bottom of the porch steps. When Adam entered the door and turned the lights on, he saw a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Lying in the hallway was Rick, face down in a thick pool of blood. Frozen in shock, Adam dared not to move further. He turned and ran outside to Pudge, telling him to call 911, though he didn't know what to tell the police since he hadn't seen it all firsthand. And when the police arrived, they were met with a huge pool of blood, around 2 to 3 feet wide. As they moved deeper into the house, they saw that Rick's head was completely wrecked, and his body looked like it had been through hell. At first, they couldn't tell how he died, but the gruesome scene made them suspect a shotgun was used. They hadn't even checked the other rooms yet. As they walked down the hallway, they noticed the walls were all messed up, like someone had punched or smashed them. Then they found the second victim, 14-year-old Dylan, curled up on the floor just outside the main bedroom, wearing nothing but shorts. His body was badly hurt, and his head was just as wrecked as Rick's. Blood splattered everywhere, even on the ceiling, making the officers feel uneasy as they continued through the house. When they stepped into the main bedroom, they saw Ruth lying on the floor in her nightgown. Half of her skull had caved in, and again blood was splattered all over the walls. Pushing on, they entered the attached bathroom, where they found 11-year-old Austin, dressed only in his underwear, lying face down on the bloody tile floor. It was clear that the G family never saw this evil coming. They must have been caught off guard getting ready for bed the night before. The officers moved cautiously through the house, unsure if the killer was still inside. They walked down that bloody hallway past Dylan's lifeless body and headed to 16-year-old Justina's room. And when they entered the room, they found something far more gruesome than what was initially found in the house. Blood smeared across every surface, soaking into her bed where Justina lay on her stomach, her head hanging over the edge, leaving a puddle of brain matter below. She had suffered the worst injuries of anyone in the family, and just when they thought it couldn't get worse, they braced themselves for what came next. As they left Justina's room, they checked an adjacent space and initially saw no more victims. But then they spotted something in the dark closet. There, they found a 3-year-old girl's body crumpled on the floor, surrounded by blood, with skin peeled back above her right ear. It broke the officers' hearts. They were trained professionals, but nothing could prepare them for such a brutal scene, especially involving such a young child, beaten to death. Suddenly, a corporal noticed something move. It was the child. A paramedic rushed over and scooped her up like a baby, dashing out to the ambulance. They quickly ushered Nicole into the ambulance too, and off they sped toward the nearest hospital. But when they arrived, they discovered that Tabitha's vital signs were alarming. Moments later, Nicole's husband Chris showed up at the G's house. He had been called from work about the terrible incident. When he arrived, the police confirmed the heartbreaking truth. The family had been murdered. But in the middle of all the chaos and tragedy, there was hope. The police told Chris that Tabitha had survived. Everyone felt a wave of relief because despite the horrific events, Tabitha was alive and might be able to help uncover who was behind this terrible crime. But not for Chris. He felt nervous when he learned Tabitha was alive. Without thinking twice, Chris jumped back in his truck and drove urgently toward the trauma center where Tabitha was being rushed. Meanwhile, 2 first responders, Logan County Sheriff's Corporal Michael Block and Illinois State Trooper Paul Hennessy, were left to sift through the crime scene for clues about what had happened inside the G family's home. Investigators found a bloody handprint on the bathroom vanity where Austin was killed, along with a fresh shoe print outside that matched a Case Swiss tennis shoe. Officers canvassed the small community and followed up on tips. One neighbor reported seeing a silver pickup truck passing by around the time of the murders, noting it had exhaust pipes coming up through the bed behind the cab. Despite these leads, police found no further clues. Dr. John Ralston, a forensic pathologist, performed the autopsies that night. He photographed every inch of the victims' bodies, but the injuries were so numerous that it was hard to keep track of them. But one thing was clear. They had been brutally attacked, and it wasn't from a gun. Initially thought to be caused by a shotgun, it turned out that each member of the G family had been bludgeoned to death, suffering with each blow until they were too weak to fight back. Starting with Rick G., the father, he had 39 impact wounds, 13 of which were to his head. His wife, Ruth, suffered 28 blows all over her body, and her skull was crushed. Their 11-year-old son, Austin, had a caved-in skull and was struck at least 21 times. Signs showed he had been pushed against hard objects and someone had stomped on his feet. 14-year-old Dylan had over 100 wounds and was struck at least 52 times. 16-year-old Justina had at least 15 identifiable injuries and was missing the top part of her skull. Meanwhile, Tabitha was in a real fight for her life. Doctors quickly discovered she had multiple skull fractures and serious brain swelling. It was tough for her. She couldn't speak or see because of the swelling in her face. But there was a small silver lining. She could still move her arm, showing she had some strength left. To help her recover, the doctors made the difficult decision to remove a few small pieces of her skull. They hoped this would ease the pressure from the swelling and help her brain heal properly. It was a scary situation, but the medical team was doing everything they could to save her. Nicole remained by Tabitha's side throughout her recovery at the hospital. The atmosphere was tense, with police officers standing vigil behind her hospital bed. They knew Tabitha was the only survivor of the horrific incident, and there was a real concern that the suspect might try to come after her. This made it all the more important for the authorities to keep a close watch on her. Additionally, Nicole did her best to help the authorities, sharing everything she could about her loved ones and what had happened. On the other hand, Chris was a constant source of support for Nicole during this incredibly tough time. He spent hours with her, trying to offer comfort and help her navigate the chaos surrounding them. However, things weren't simple between Chris and Nicole. Their relationship had been tumultuous, filled with ups and downs. They had broken up several times, but had only managed to patch things up again earlier that same year in 2009. Days passed, and the police found themselves at a standstill. Despite following every lead they could, like the details of the suspicious car and the fresh shoe prints, they still hadn't identified any official suspects. The G family had no known enemies. In fact, they were well liked in the neighborhood, known for their generosity and kindness. Many neighbors could vouch for their good nature, painting a picture of a family that was both wealthy and loving. In light of the recent events, the police took precautions and encouraged everyone in the community to secure their homes and stay alert.
People just need to take the normal precautions that you would take, the practical measures of at night, lock your door, know where your children are at, and keep track of your neighbors.
A week passed, and the funeral for the G family was held on the 28th of that same month. It was a heartbreaking day, but among all the grief, Tabitha was still fighting for her life in the hospital. And while the community mourned, there was also a lingering fear because the killer was still out there and no one knew when or if they might strike again. Then, in a random but significant twist of fate, a major break in the case came at the hospital where Tabitha was being treated. One officer, after finishing his shift in guarding Tabitha, shared an elevator ride with Chris Harris, who had just left Tabitha's room. The officer happened to glance down and noticed Chris's shoes, K-Swiss sneakers with an aggressive tread, just like the shoe print found outside the crime scene. The officer quickly informed detectives, which led to Chris being called in for questioning. They compared his shoe tread to the print found at the scene, but there was a slight discrepancy. The shoes were a half size too big. However, the detectives knew something was off, so they didn't stop there. They collected Christopher Harris's fingerprints and palm prints, sending them to the crime lab for further analysis. To prove his innocence, his brother, Jason Harris, stepped in to defend him, providing an alibi and claiming they had been together the entire time, far away from Beason, where the murders occurred. Meanwhile, Nicole was furious at the mere suggestion that Christopher could be involved. She took to her MySpace page to defend him, writing in an emotional, though error-filled message. "This whole situation is such a mess and so unfair. Not only have my children lost 5 close family members, but now their daddy is being set up and taken away. This is too much to bear." Nicole continued, "There's solid evidence that all 6 victims fought for their lives, and Chris doesn't even have a scratch on him. He's been with us through everything, and now they've taken him too." Nicole wasn't the only one standing up for Chris. His stepmother, Debbie Harris, also spoke out to the media, saying their family believed in his innocence. Chris's father, Ed, was in tears during a phone call with Chris from jail. According to Debbie, Chris was shocked by his arrest and scared for his family's safety, telling his father, "Dad, I'm scared because I know the killers are still out there." He swore he didn't commit the murders. When police booked Chris, they photographed his entire body. Although he didn't have any injuries, they noticed a large blister on the palm of his right hand. Coincidentally, A tire iron was later found near a creek by Jason's house, where investigators were still searching for clues. On October 2nd, when they seized Chris's truck, they found it belonged to Jennifer Ernest, Jason's girlfriend and mother of his other children. Both Jennifer and her mother, Sarah Duncan, had provided alibis for Chris and Jason on the night of the murders. But as the investigation unfolded, those alibis were proven false, leading to their arrest for obstruction of justice. The police were able to discredit the alibis partly because Chris's palm print had been found at the scene. Additionally, a woman named Lori Cole, an armed security guard, came forward. She claimed that on the night of the murders, around 11:35 p.m., Chris and his brother Jason knocked on her door, asking if she wanted to party. Lori, who lived not far from the G family, recalled telling Chris she wasn't interested and needed to sleep for work. She noticed a Ford Ranger parked outside, similar to the one Chris and Jason were seen with earlier. Although she told them to leave, their behavior left her unsettled, as they seemed to have already been partying and didn't want the night to end. Another woman, Christy Moore, came forward during the investigation. She told investigators that she and Chris had been on-again, off-again lovers. She revealed that Chris had called her late on that same Sunday night, but she was busy with her kids and couldn't meet up for what she knew he wanted, sex. However, she agreed to see him after her children went to school the next morning. Chris arrived at her house in Clinton, just a 15-minute drive from Beason, about 12 hours after the murders. They slept together, and Christy said Chris was acting completely normal. Afterward, Christy even took selfies of the two of them in bed. In the pictures, they were kissing and giving each other flirtatious looks, with Chris smiling in some of them. She told investigators that Chris had no visible injuries or marks on his body and that nothing about him seemed unusual, except that she hadn't seen him in the past 2 months, likely because he had just had a baby with Nicole 2 months earlier. From the moment Chris was accused, he maintained his innocence, denying any involvement in the murders. However, when confronted with fingerprint evidence, he invoked his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and got a lawyer. It seemed that Chris was content to let the legal process play out, but things took a sharp turn as the pressure began to mount on his brother Jason. Initially charged with obstruction of justice, Jason's charges were soon upgraded to 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder, the same as Chris's charges. Jason, now facing the possibility of life in prison, had a choice to make: stay silent and support his brother, or tell the truth and save himself. The survival instinct kicked in, and Jason began to talk. The story he told was chilling. According to Jason, the night had started with drugs and alcohol. He and Chris had been out partying hard, drinking, and snorting cocaine. Eventually, they decided they needed a woman's company to keep the night going. They first tried to reach out to some ex-girlfriends, but both women turned them down. That should have been the end of the night, but under the influence of drugs and Chris's heightened libido, the brothers continued their search for female company, which tragically led them to the G family's home. Jason recounted that they had first tried to visit Lori Cole, the armed security guard who lived nearby. He waited in the truck while Chris approached Lori's door, but she turned him away. What happened next is where Jason's story became inconsistent. He gave 13 different versions of the events, but the one thing that remained constant was his claim that Chris killed the G family. Jason alleged that it was Chris's idea to go to the G residence with the intent of having sex with Justina G, the 16-year-old daughter of the family and Chris's sister-in-law. Chris had convinced himself that Justina had been flirting with him. Whether they planned for it to be consensual or not remains unclear, but Jason said Chris believed Justina was interested in him. He then said that he stayed in the truck while Chris approached the house. In some versions of the story, Chris was already armed with a tire iron. In others, he went to the door without it. In one account, Rick G., the father, answered the door, and after a brief conversation, things escalated, leading Chris to retrieve the tire iron from the truck. Jason said he then heard screams and thumping sounds coming from inside the house. the horrifying beginning of what would turn into a gruesome massacre. Jason said he stayed in the pickup truck the whole time, just listening to the chaos inside the house. He heard loud thumps and screams and saw Dylan jump out of a bedroom window. After that, Dylan ran to the front door and went back inside. Next thing Jason knew, Dylan burst out of the house, bleeding a lot, with Christopher Harris right behind him. Jason saw Chris hit Dylan 5 or 6 times with a tire iron before heading back inside. Miraculously, Dylan got back on his feet and went into the house again. A few minutes later, Chris came out and hopped into the pickup. As they drove down the dirt road, he tossed his shoes and the tire iron out the window like it was no big deal. It's important to note that there had been a complaint of attempted sexual assault against Christopher Harris involving Justina, but this complaint was dropped just a week before the incident. Jason suggested that Christopher had intended to go to the G house for sexual motives, which ultimately did not happen. Investigators retraced the path that Jason Harris had described during his testimony. They found the K-Swiss shoes and the tire iron thrown into a ditch beside the road. Forensic tests confirmed that the DNA found on these items matched both Christopher Harris and the G family. On May 31st, 2013, a jury found Christopher Harris guilty of murdering the G family. His sentencing happened on July 19, 2013, where he received 5 consecutive life sentences. In addition, he was sentenced to 30 years for the attempted murder of Tabitha, 30 years for home invasion, and 20 years for robbery. Christopher Harris's defense team tried to argue that he had walked in on Dylan during the murders and acted in self-defense when he killed Dylan. However, this argument was quickly dismissed. In 2013, just before his sentencing, Christopher and his legal team sought a retrial, but their request was denied. Later, in 2019, they filed an appeal with the Appellate Court of Illinois, 4th District, but that too was denied. If you think the story ends here, well, not quite. A former cellmate of Chris stepped forward, claiming that Chris had confided in him about the terrible events of that night. This cellmate revealed a story even darker than what Jason had shared. According to him, when Chris arrived at the G home, Rick answered the door. An argument broke out, escalating quickly when Chris hit Rick with the tire iron. Ruth heard the commotion and rushed in to see what was going on. Sadly, as she entered the room, Chris turned his violent rage on her. In the midst of the chaos, Dylan grabbed a kitchen knife, trying to protect his mother. But Chris was too strong, and it was during this intense moment that Jason saw Dylan crash through the window for the first time. In a chilling twist, the cellmate reported that Chris felt no remorse for his actions. In fact, he claimed his only regret was not burning down the house that night, suggesting that if he had, no one would ever know he was responsible for the violence. And let's not forget Nicole. With all the evidence piling up against Chris, she went from defending him to cursing him. Additionally, during the sentencing hearing, Tabitha also delivered an emotional statement that tugged at everyone's heartstrings. She said, "I am 7, and it still breaks my heart. I wish you were dead and my brothers, sister, and mommy and daddy were alive. You don't sneak up on other people. You have to say sorry because do you know how badly that broke my heart?" As for Jason, he got a 10-year sentence in exchange for testifying against Chris with credit for time served. This decision sparked debate. Many questioned if it was fair for someone who played a part in such terrible acts. There were many times that night when Jason could have stepped in to help. He heard Dylan calling out for assistance, begging him to intervene, but he didn't act. However, his testimony helped bring justice for the G family. After the trial, Jason's girlfriend Jennifer and her mother faced probation and fines for hiding evidence. Meanwhile, little Tabitha, who was protected by state troopers during her hospital stay, formed a special bond with them. They painted her toenails, read her stories, and played games, showering her with the love and care she needed. They even threw her a birthday party. Despite going through many surgeries, Tabitha made a remarkable recovery, and fortunately, the head injuries she suffered allowed her to forget the horrific events that took her family away. Tabitha spent some time in foster care but eventually found a loving home with her sister, Nicole. As the community mourned and tried to heal from this tragic loss, they dedicated a playground in memory of Austin, Dylan, and Justina, creating a space where their spirits could be honored and celebrated. In an interesting twist, in 2014, the show When Murder Comes to Town aired, trying to shed light on the G family murders. Despite interviewing various residents and officers involved in the case, the show leaned heavily on the defense's narrative, suggesting that Dylan was a deeply troubled boy, capable of violence. This portrayal sparked outrage among those who had worked on the case. The officers involved wrote an open letter questioning the show's accuracy, particularly how Dylan was portrayed. They emphasized his heroism, stating he wasn't just a victim, but a brave teen who tried to protect his family. I agree with their perspective, as Dylan's actions deserve recognition for his courage in the face of tragedy. What are your thoughts? Was the sentencing fair? Or do you believe the accomplices should have received harsher penalties? Let us know in the comments. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.